so they pushed me fully, considering the hybrid nature of virtual discussions.
I'm feeling very like that today, because everyone else has got a trusty assistant.
We can
Oh, I don't.
trust me.
Well, I forget to tell you the clip, so I will. I want to continue today, actually, with some of the issues that have been brought up in the previous session and obviously this morning. Not least the phrase that I find quite interesting, which is this idea of seeing as students see. There's some of the evidence behind me. I'm going to give you some more a little bit later on. But firstly, a little bit of context. I have used a discussion board attached to as part of the virtual learning environment on a first-year course introducing Chaucer at the University of Manchester. I've done that now for a number of years, and it's always been a standalone, sort of to some extent, within the department. Recently, one of the core modules also has a discussion board attached to it. It's been quite interesting to see a kind of clash, if you like, between vision and management and so on of these two boards, which is where I'm actually drawing my evidence. What actually happened, in some senses, was that students began spontaneously a very long thread on my own board, fortunately not complaining about me, but complaining bitterly about the other one and its type of curtailed discussion. I'll talk about those in a little while. The quote that I have behind me from students is, I think, summing up a lot of the issues that I'm going to be dealing with today. But just a little bit more about these boards. They both operate to similar numbers. Mine has something like 200 plus on this course, and the core course does anything up to 280 when it brings in people from other subject areas. My board is always an open one. I try very hard to keep out of it. I don't assess it. The participation in it is purely voluntary. And I leave it open to the entire cohort of students. In contrast, the other board is a very closed board. So I'm using, if you like, a pull mechanism. The other one uses a push mechanism. 10% of the whole coursework mark goes for the board, contribution to the board, and it's assessed in terms of quantity and quality. Quantity being 15 to 20 postings across the 10, 11, 12-week course each semester. And quality, the usual kind of essay skills, I would describe them as, formal conventions of grammar and spelling, they're all sort of penalised or rewarded, depending on how well or not you do it. Argument, fully rounded ideas, complete ideas, and so on. As I say, so they're actually using a push mechanism on this. But what students want, I think, is in fact something that's very, very different. In fact, I want you to kind of keep clicking down until you get to the end where it's... Go on, I'll tell you. Stop. Sorry. Not to worry. Students are telling me that what they're looking for is an open query. Start again. They're not. Because I'm getting excited about this board. They're looking for an open platform, one that involves query, one that might involve some kind of dissent. It involves exploration. They're also looking to share resources, tips on things that they've read, websites that they've come across, this kind of thing. That's what's taking place on my board. And they describe this in the following terms. They call this a genuine discussion. They say this is where we can informally chat and raise any questions we might have about this course or other issues. Where they can say things as they do on mine, like, I don't know what to make of Alison. Chaucer's women confuse me too. Where they say it really helps to hear others' opinions and pick up useful advice, or to browse simply, select and so on through the threads without the pressure of assessment and feeling that they have to make a specific response. Students particularly disliked, if you like, the core boards, the closed boards, subdivision of the year group into, if you like, virtual classes that match their real-life classes. They didn't like this at all. And the reasons were as follows. They said that as a consequence, they missed out, students felt that they missed out on a cross-pollination of ideas. And one respondent puts it as the best resource, which is other students. which is, again, I think quite interesting in the sense that they feel that they actually want to own this space. Some of the other issues, I think, are also important here. And it relates to what I'm calling a sense of ownership of the board. And it involves, obviously, surveillance and assessment. They demand spontaneity. They say things like, I prefer to be able to post when I actually have something to say, rather than the pressure of feeling that they have to make something like 1, possibly 2 postings during the week. They're looking for what they call a lively and extended debate, not a mundane exercise in achieving 10% of the course mark. And they're very clear, which I was very interested in, which is also why I let this thread kind of run for a long time. They were interested in, or being able to very clearly, I think, pinpoint what the effects of this kind of top-heavy, if you like, assessment actually are. They say that as a consequence, they end up working to goal. That it stifles debate, and again they use the following kind of phrases, that you get rehearsed debates, you get, they say, formulated observations and mini-essays. Discussions are no longer free and organic. Instead, students regurgitate what is said in the lectures and go over the same ground that has been explored in the tutorial, not least, I think, because of the very relatively small number of co-respondents. I mention that because when it first began at Manchester, we were dealing with seminar groups of 20, 25. And the last kind of year or so, they plummeted dramatically. Beautiful political piece of sidestepping here. And very often, those seminar groups now are only 8, 10, maximum of 12. So that's a huge kind of difference in the exchange of ideas. What else is interesting, I think, is that students have a very acute sense of surveillance. This idea that the board is not theirs, that the space is not theirs. We saw that in the very first quote that I had, the idea that you are somehow looking always to appear clever in front of the tutor. But again, another respondent comments as follows. Students are afraid to write something that is their true thought and original because they are being assessed. They want to play it safe. I'm going to come back to these issues of surveillance in a little while, if I may. The final thing, she says, having completely the final thing is that there is a concern over technical issues. There is generally, I think, some resistance amongst certainly Manchester to some English students, full stop. We don't do computers, there's no, that's what other people do. But there are also, I think, quite a thoughtful response that has been raised earlier, which depends on the kinds of students you get. Not all students have access to their own PCs, or indeed are familiar with the particular technology and can use this resource 24/7, which is basically what it's about. And again, large numbers of these kind of protested and said that particularly when there's a sense of that assessment coming into play, that what you end up having to do, of course, is to actually go out of your way to post. Well, okay, that's maybe a good thing, but as they say, if you're queuing for a long time at these sort of computer clusters, or having to stand on a cold, wet Monday morning in a great long line, in the library, just so that you can actually click on your 1 or 2 postings to make sure you hit the minimum number, that in effect actually stifles enthusiasm for anything that you might have had to say. And considering it's always rains in Manchester, I can feel, I sympathise with that. Should we put it on the next one? Again, and I start. I'm really enjoying this. This is great. I'd love a secretary or something. It'd be exciting, wouldn't it? Real life and virtual life. One of the things I want to begin to talk about today, or get us maybe to think about, is something that we don't. And that is similarities and differences, I think, in virtual and real life discussion. There is a tendency, I think, for us, to be so concerned about putting these packages together and so on and so forth, to not quite think about how these differences sort of actually operate and what their effects are. Not least, we seduced, and I certainly was when I started, into thinking actually that they were pretty much the same, because there was enough similarity between a real life and a virtual life, if you like, discussion, to sort of make us go down that path. Obviously, in normal, in inverted commas, discussion, things are circular. They're incomplete. They're digressive. We've been talking about stuff that is apparently off task. There's a lot of kind of natural chatter at the start and so on and so forth. You get all these kinds of ideas. Things peter out. It is not linear. They're not fully formed thought. We don't speak, well, I certainly don't, in fully formed sentences and always necessarily think about our choice of words, perhaps. because it's an oral, if you like, situation. The other thing, as I say, is about this idea of natural chatter. Very often at the start, you have a few moments just kind of easing into a class and into a discussion. Things that appear off task. I've certainly read a couple of researchers who are scathing about what they describe as dialogues that are incoherent on a discussion board. But it seems to me that if you are transferring a circular, open, kind of ongoing discussion, it's bound to look incoherent, indeed bizarre on occasion if you actually write it down. Made worse, of course, by the fact that there is this time lag always on asynchronous media. And I think that's very important. One student comments here, and there's an interesting one. She asks, would the department ever dream of recording conversations in the tutorials? And my response to that is no, we wouldn't. And if we were going to assess in some way, shape or form an oral presentation, say, then we would be thinking about assessment criteria that are very, very different from the core board that these students are complaining about, which is assessing on the basis of formal written structures of discursive essay writing, if you like. Equally, another one comments that such dialogues, and the opposite, virtual dialogues these, are never dynamic or spontaneous like it is in seminars, qualities which by its very nature WebCT cannot possess, which is beginning to lead us on, I think now, to the differences, many of which students seem far more aware of, I think, than we do. So what I'm saying here is that, there is an invisible mechanics behind these kinds of things. There is an invisible hierarchy and an architecture, and each of these situations has a particular effect. In class, we're discussing in a neatly bounded community or context. We're talking face-to-face. It's real time. We know where its authority is. It's centrally located. It's usually by the tutor, or at least, the very least, if it's a VLE, the course designer. We can attend to all these non-verbal cues that we take very much for granted, but which enable us, of course, to judge tone and formulate a response and to diffuse potential conflict and so on. As I said, it's digressive, and that natural chatter is, in fact, important. It's not off-task, I would suggest. It's actually what we do when we bond together as a group. It's actually a way of affirming other people's opinions and sort of giving feedback in that respect. Would you like to move on? Keep clicking. And again. That's it. Here I think are some of the crucial differences that we do need to think about. It's an asynchronous medium. And as a result, some research is going to argue that it's immediately a pull mechanism. By its very nature, therefore, it's not a push mechanism, which raises immediately the question of assessment. I would say, in an ideal world, I wouldn't want to assess it. I'm very kind of reluctantly coming to the conclusion now that if we're going to do that then and put in hooks to pull people in, then I need at least to think much more carefully about the kind of hooks I'm going to get in to make sure I get the maximum kind of participation. But this time lag is also important because you get this lack of flow, if you like, to the dialogue that maybe you don't see, obviously, in a real-life discussion, a discontinuity. As I've said, one researcher that I've read certainly describes this as incoherence. However, we need to bear this in, mind if we're coming to assess it. What looks to be incoherent, as I say, is perhaps exploratory. But we also have these other things, in the absence of non-verbal cues, because we can't see each other online, you get this very artificial, very bizarre situation. It gets, in fact, a disinhibiting effect, I think, is what actually happens. And it tends to sort of cause extremes of either hostility, my own view is that that's pretty rare, or intimacy. Everybody gets all super friendly online. They write to me, "Hi, Gail." But then the strange thing is I find myself responding back, I haven't got a clue who they are. "Hi, so-and-so, good to hear from you." And I'm thinking, but this is again, I think, affirmative, isn't it? You want to be in with the community. But what you do get, I think, on this disinhibiting effect is also a distancing. And again, there's some research to suggest that as a result, this is one of the reasons why you don't get maximum participation if you're using a hook mechanism like this. Because nobody knows who you are, and you can kind of hide away. It's like hiding away at the back of the class and stuff, And also, I think, You also have an effect where I call it lurking. I've read somebody else who calls it social loafing. I think I should prefer that. Somehow makes me think of a costume. Social loafing. And what I mean by that, and again, a lot of students have said this to me, they don't actively post, but they do read what's online, and they do use it, and they do think about it, which is why I've said this in the past, I'm not so concerned as I would be in a real-life context about those students who aren't actively participating. If they're reading, they're having to make choices and follow threads through and choose which links to go. And, maybe that's not as passive as it seems. The disinhibiting effect also, I think, is exacerbated by this loss of authority. Especially if, like me, you actually want to keep out of the discussion. But there are also, again, several points here. Anna Smith suggests that people are actually more attentive to the content of online messages than they are in real life. Perhaps because it's written down and archived, and you have a chance to peruse it and think about it. Certainly my experience bears that out. And equally, the one about tone. I think students actually take their cue from the board's management. And if I nearly showed you, but I would have been too long to kind of do this, I could have shown you differences in the style of response on my own board, where I'm very informal, and as I said, I leave it open and I try and stay out as much as possible, in contrast to the core boards, discussion boards, where tasks are very tightly bounded, questions, okay, they may be open-ended, but they're very, heavily text-based and close analysis and so on and so forth. And again, because of this idea that they're being assessed for quality, you get these full, coherent, if you like, carefully thought-out responses, which in some senses add to the artificiality of this environment. And students then are suggesting to me that they're actually inhibited by that overt surveillance, that they would rather have the kind of choice about whether they're going to post or not, which comes back to what we were discussing a little bit earlier. However, even though I think I keep out of these boards, students are still very aware that authority is located somewhere, and it brings us eventually, I'll discuss that in a moment, onto a sense of ownership of the board. Students refer to me by name. They obviously know that I do occasionally dip in and out and kind of look at the postings. They are aware kind of what I'm doing. One apologised to me for telling her peers not to read a particular critic, and ended with, sorry if you like her, Gail. And it's almost so tempting to post and say, well, actually, yes, I do. But, you kind of, have to draw back, I think, from that. The other is this. We all know how to respond in a real-life situation. We almost by osmosis, we know what its discourse is. We know what its conventions are. Online, students don't necessarily do that. And certainly one of the starter questions I often ask on the board is for the students. I ask the students to come up with things that they think people should and shouldn't say and do on the board. They invent their own protocols. But, online, we give just-sized, bite-sized pieces of information. We know how to create links and so on. Equally, if we're reading online, we're looking to select, to negotiate our way through bits of information or to trail it. To read in gist, to read prospectively, to read retrospectively, to interpret sometimes sounds and images. And in other words, what I'm saying is it's completely different from formal, written, standard English. And again, in my view, therefore, to assess that, or to make that part of the assessment, seems to be completely anathema to the whole spirit of what we want to do. Would you like just to and again. And again. And again. I don't know where to stop now. And again. One more, I think. Brilliant. Right. All right. I kind of said what I think, that I'm kind of, in some senses, anti-assessment. I am, however, mindful that if you don't assess, you do not get 100% participation. If I had to kind of very, it sounds a huge difference. My participation on my boards vary from year to year for reasons I've never been quite able to explain. At its best, it's gone anything between 35 and 40%. At its worst, it's gone 18%. And so for every one student who's posted, 3, 4, even 5 are not, even though they may be actively looking. And obviously that's a worry. And I think part of that is because I need to look again at how I'm going to hook students in. And one of the ways, again, is what I say, is to give them a sense of ownership. I think I need to stay out more. I think I need to get students to manage the board, particularly those who've been very vocal on past boards. sorry folks, if you post a lot on that board, next year you're going to find yourself being asked to sort of manage it and to come up with some of the questions and so on. Certainly in terms of etiquette, I've done that before. I missed completely one apparently homophobic reference that had come up, and a student emailed me. I've got to hurry up on that. It's right on the low last night, how we get done. The student emailed me and sort of said, this is not on. I hadn't seen it. Unfortunately for him, having emailed me, I made him come on and actually manage the board then, and sort of dip in and out of discussion like that. But just hugely quickly, I say it's not product, and as a result, we shouldn't be looking, as I say, for essay style skills. They're assessed so many other ways across courses. It should be process. That we should be looking at creative forms of assessment. My VLE is attached actually to a group project, so they have an automatic hook on the discussion board because they can download and use these extended dialogues as part of their research, and there's evidence for portfolio. Reflective is one of the things that have just come up, this idea of reflective learning. Reflecting not just on creative writing and drafting, but also on the processes of their own learning. What contribution did this make to their own independent research? Did they swap resources? They do a lot of swapping of resources. Where will they go? What will they do? As I say, all this makes them invest in their own learning, and hopefully as a result feel that the space is theirs and theirs alone. Whether they choose to use it or not, is up to them. And I think if we build in sufficiently, if you like, hidden sticks, rather than whipping them to death, if we build in these hidden sticks, then they might actually sort of begin to use it. If we make it worthwhile, that they can download it into portfolios as evidence and so on, or even attach it to their own actual coursework assignments and sort of say, as a result of this dialogue, I went off to look at such and such and evaluate whatever. And I will now peter out and run back to my seat.
Well,
thank you so much for that.
We do have a couple of minutes.
I'm sorry.
Just a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. So
I obviously don't want it as much.
There's one in the back.
Just a quick one, really. Is it that yours an online store, or do your students get a chance to an online institute?
No, the very first time I used the discussion board, it was actually way before WebCT or anything came in. And students, when I began to discuss whether I should use it with them or not in this particular course, said, we will only post if it's anonymous. So I did set up a facility whereby they did that, and after the first week or two, they all then began to attach their names. So I actually don't think it's as big an issue as possible. On WebCT, on the current thing that I'm using, I can no longer anonymise it. What I don't think they've ever fully realised, actually, is that then we can archive it. And this idea again about using discussion postings actually in the seminars and going back to, well, even the previous year's board, to sort of, for a particular extended dialogue that you thought was interesting, I think could be usefully sort of brought in that way.
Can I ask, how do you sort of kickstart it? Do you put on some sort of topic suggestions, or do you leave it to spontaneously?
No. I try and choose something that's absolutely open and not at all kind of unfriendly. The reason we no longer have such a huge cohort on this particular course, but one of the reasons we had 200 plus was simply because it was a free choice, but it fell in a bizarre way so that they were actually avoiding other choices. So it was a bit of a Hobson's choice. And so generally we got students who'd done no choice at all. And of course they're terrified, hence I began then. Often my first question is, what is it that you're worried about on this course? What are you expecting to get from this course? In an ideal world, would you have done it? And be prepared to take, all the kind of fuss that comes from that. And plus, as I say, sometimes then the next one will be, what kind of things do you value on postings? If you've used, a lot of these people you see have used chat rooms and so on, elsewhere. Do you want long postings, short postings? It's why I think we should also involve students in drawing up, if we are going to assess, get students to say what the criteria are. I've certainly done that on other courses in other situations for portfolio, and they're very clear about what they do and they don't value. So that's useful.
What do they value?
What do they value?
Briefly,
well, again, this open-ended talk, and they like short postings.
Right.
They don't. Arsey was the word that was used to involve on students. We don't want any arsey postings. Because equally, some of them said to me that they don't actually respond on the board because they find some of the stuff intimidating.
Yeah.
It looks too clever, and they don't want clever responses. But they do want the affirmative thing. I like what you said about so-and-so. And they do like it if you say, well, actually, I don't really know what I'm doing. Help. Some have said, I can't read Middle English. you and me both, sort of any suggestions, and you have to sort of tie your hands behind your back and wait for the students to and the students will come up and say, I found such and such useful. So,
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was really great.